Every payday, you hear the same thing. If you want more, work more. That's the whole equation. So you take the Saturday shift again. For the third week in a row, 40 extra hours this month, same pay, same tired legs by Sunday evening. No one's talking about the other rule. The one that doesn't need your Saturdays. It's sitting right now in your banking app, forgotten, doing nothing while you sleep. And yet, it's quietly costing more than the shift you just worked. By 10 o'clock in the morning, you're back at your desk at the insurance office, headset dangling around your neck, and Marina from the claims department unfolds the monitor to show you her new lease. This year's SUV, fixed monthly payment, 3 years, no down payment. I just felt like I deserved it, she says. You nod because you know exactly what it takes to say that phrase out loud and what it takes to actually believe it. You earn about the same as Marina. Same shifts, same coffee from the communal kitchen, same letter about a 3% raise every January. And yet, this decision, the car, the monthly figure, the signature on the dotted line, somehow feels like she's pulled ahead. For a second, under the fluorescent lights, it does. Then you return to your desk and open the banking app again. It's the same one you recently closed the tab from after checking your balance, only this time you don't close it. You keep scrolling. Your savings are quite small. The pension plan you opened when you started working a year and a half ago with a partial contribution from the company is also modest. No other investments, no personal account, nothing. You add it up in your head, then on a calculator. The result is a figure that feels different than your salary. Your salary is a number that flows through you. It comes in, goes out for rent, gas, that cereal you still bought. This figure is different. It's what's left after everything else has taken its share. What you've actually saved. You think about Marina's car again. Only now you think differently. Her payment is for something that loses value every day she drives it. Your automatic contribution to your pension plan is the only payment that makes you richer, not poorer. No one flips over their monitor to show their pension account balance. No one posts a screenshot of their IRA history. But one of those numbers grows on its own, while the other depreciates the moment it leaves the showroom. That evening, behind the wheel of an old compact car with 6-figure miles on it, a check engine light you've been ignoring since March, you don't feel like you're falling behind for the first time. It seems you finally figured out the true criteria by which you're being judged. It wasn't the car in the parking lot. It wasn't the number that comes and goes until the 15th. It was the number that remains, and that's the problem, because right now, what remains isn't growing. It's being eaten up by something else, something with your name on the envelope, a term and an interest rate, and you haven't opened that letter in 3 weeks. The letter still sits unread in your inbox. The subject line has faded with time. You open it on a Sunday evening on the couch, your laptop on your lap, a bowl of heated pasta cooling nearby. A credit card. The balance is a decent amount. The annual interest rate is almost 24%. The minimum payment is small but consistent. You know that number. You've been accumulating it slowly, like most people. A deposit on an apartment you didn't have the cash to pay, an unscheduled dental appointment in February, a ticket to your cousin's wedding that you put on your card because the alternative was simply not going. None of it seemed reckless at the time. It felt like life. A neighbor on the landing, who worked nights as a paralegal, once remarked that he simply paid the minimum and didn't think about it. "It's just pennies," he said, leaning against the mailboxes. You nodded, and now, tonight on the couch, you finally made the calculation he never had to. At this rate, paying only the minimum, the entire balance will be paid off in more than 9 years. You'll pay more in interest than the debt itself, just for the privilege of not having to think about it sooner. The number no longer seems abstract. It feels like a second rent payment, agreed to without reading the contract. You recall a recent contribution to your pension plan, a small sum, quietly growing in the background, untouched, accumulating to your advantage. This card is the same mechanism, only in reverse, the same ruthless daily interest calculation, only instead of building something, it destroys something, payment after payment. The neighbor's "it's just pennies" is actually a 9-year sentence with a gigantic overpayment. You're opening a second account not to transfer the debt. Your credit history isn't strong enough for a card with a zero deposit period. It's to build a real plan instead of an imaginary one. You divide the remaining balance by 18 months. It comes out to a significant monthly amount. It's uncomfortable. It's canceling a subscription, eating out instead of delivery, canceling a second wedding, your neighbor's sister's, which you can barely even imagine, and how will you explain it? But over a year and a half, the interest overpayment will be several times less than with the minimum payments. You write the number on a Post-it note and stick it on your laptop, not as motivation, but simply as a fact. You don't want to lose again like you did for 3 weeks without opening this email. There's a version of this evening where you close the laptop, finish the cold pasta, and leave everything as is. No one would know. The card would continue to work at the register. The number would continue to grow in the place you've trained yourself not to look. Instead, you set up an autopay on Friday. You look at the confirmation screen and feel something closer to anxiety than relief, because this amount is real money, draining your already tight budget. That's why the money you don't have yet, but which is sitting somewhere safe and untouched, will soon mean more than ever. The wall in 6 months. 3 weeks after starting autopayment, your car answers a question you didn't ask. The check engine light stops blinking and just stays on. And 2 days later, the car won't start in the office parking lot at 5:30 p.m. when the lot is already half empty and the sky has taken on that flat gray-orange hue of late October. The tow truck driver, who's been in the business for over 10 years and told you this without any reason, takes the car to the shop. The diagnosis comes the next morning, the alternator and the belt, which was already on its last legs. The fee for labor and parts is due before the car is released. You have very little savings in your account. It was the same amount 3 weeks ago before you started throwing every spare dollar at the card, and you haven't added anything since then because the card seemed more urgent. Sitting in the workshop's waiting area, the coffee machine humming in the corner, you do a calculation you should have done a month ago. The difference between the repair cost and what's in your account is money you don't have. The closest source is that same credit card, the same one you've been trying to reduce for the last 3 weeks. It's at this point that everything stops being abstract. All the talk about interest rates and savings was true, but it was theoretical, a number on a screen you could close. And here's a car that won't start, and a repair shop that demands cash payments before the end of the day. It's the difference between an inconvenience and an emergency. And the only thing separating one from the other is the presence or absence of money that already exists somewhere, with your name on it. You deposit the remaining amount onto your card. It's the only option in the room. And as you watch the payment go through, you understand, not from the article, not from someone at the workshop, but from the feeling in your chest, why talk of a 6-month reserve isn't just a savings goal. It's a wall. Something that should have stood between you and that very payment, but hasn't yet been built. A colleague at the next desk once mentioned that she kept several months' worth of expenses in a separate savings account, untouched. "It's intentionally boring," she said. You nodded politely, filing it away in the "Things Responsible People Do" folder. Now, leaving the workshop with a working generator and a slightly heavier balance on the card you've just started paying off, it doesn't seem boring anymore. It seems like the difference between a bad Tuesday and a bad year. Your monthly expenses, rent, insurance, groceries, gas, the inevitable minimum, add up to a certain amount. A 6-month reserve is a figure so far removed from what's in your account now that it seems impossible. For a second, it is. But you're not building the entire amount this week. You're building the first crumbs this Friday, just like the automatic payment on your card became a reality when you simply chose a date. That same evening, before you can talk yourself out of it, you open a separate account and transfer a small sum into it. Money that technically doesn't have room in your budget, but you put aside anyway. That's not the wall yet. That's the first brick. Somewhere beneath all this lurks a quieter question. Not, what happens if the car breaks down? But, how much are you worth per hour when nothing breaks down at all? Income engine. The question of your hourly rate doesn't take long to answer. On Monday morning, your boss, Artyom, calls you into a small conference room with broken blinds, and in an almost apologetic tone informs you that the raise this year is again 3%, the same figure as last year and the year before. You're counting before you even reach your desk. After taxes, it's a tiny bit of extra money each month, less than you just started saving for your emergency fund. You sit there, staring at the two company-issued monitors, one noticeably dimmer than the other, and remember something a colleague mentioned in passing. She mentioned taking a part-time job processing insurance claims for a small company remotely, a few hours a week, using the same skills she uses all day at her main job. "It's not a side job," she said. "It's the same job, just not constrained by what my boss thinks I'm worth." This thought lingers longer than the raise itself. Your salary has a cap built into the system itself, a percentage that your boss doesn't set alone, but is decided somewhere higher up, at a budget meeting to which you'll never be invited. But the skill itself, quickly sorting through a case, compiling documents neatly, noticing details others miss, has no cap set by anyone else, only the one you set for yourself. That evening, you open your laptop, not to check your balance, but to browse freelance platforms. You create a profile in an hour, list 2 software tools you're proficient in, and forget about it for a few days until a message arrives from a small independent appraisal firm. 15 cases, fixed hourly rate, remote, evenings. It's not much, but 15 tasks over 2 weeks, completed in an hour and a half after dinner, that would previously have been wasted on a purposeless feed. That's money without a ceiling, without a boss, without the 3%. And this changes something else you didn't expect. When you work on freelance projects, you notice how much faster you get things done than at your full-time job because no one watches the clock, because only the quality of the finished product matters. You also notice that the old laptop sitting at the kitchen table isn't cutting it anymore. The screen is small, the software is slow, and you have to squint at 10 p.m. comparing versions of the same document. You eye an inexpensive refurbished monitor and hesitate for a couple of days before buying. This isn't a luxury. This isn't a car from a parking lot. This is what makes earning extra income possible without ruining your eyesight by Thursday. By the end of the month, between the raise and the part-time job, your income had grown significantly. And for the first time, this increase didn't come from Artyom. It came from a skill you already had, channeled into something your position couldn't reach. And that raises another question. Is the safest place for this extra money really the most obvious? Bet on your own business. The message from that appraisal firm turns into a real offer within 6 weeks. Not a new freelance gig, but a full-time position. A startup called ClaimStock, 4 people, no office, creating software that automates the very work you've been doing manually for 2 years. The founder, a former appraiser named Regina, is offering a salary lower than my current one, plus a small stake in the company with a 4-year vesting. You bring a proposal to your colleague at lunch, sliding your phone across the table as if it might bite. She reads it twice. "That's a pay cut," she says. "The same thing you already know. The same thing that has been keeping you up since Tuesday." Regina's former boss left a stable appraisal job 6 years ago for something very similar. That company was sold last spring. Regina once mentioned that her former boss walked away with several million and bought a house on a lake outside the city. You don't know if ClaimStock will turn out like that? No one does. That's the whole point. It's rarely stated outright. An asymmetric bet isn't a guess disguised as certainty. It's a deal where you can predetermine your loss. The downside here is the difference in salary over 4 years if the stake never turns into anything. It's a figure you can live with. Not Marina's car rental, not a generator accident, a bruise, not a fracture. There's no ceiling on the benefit because a company stake works differently than a salary. Artyom's 3% raise was capped at the time of the announcement. Regina's stake is unlimited except for how much ClaimStock grows. And if it grows even slightly like her boss's previous company, that stake will become money that will change the decade in which you retire. That evening, you make a calculation you've never made before. An amount equivalent to 5 times your annual expenses, invested and growing on its own, the point at which compound interest can take you to the end of your journey without a single extra dollar invested. A colleague once jokingly called it the high tide point. Half joking in the way people joke about what they really want, you're far from that figure. But for the first time, you see a path where a stake in the company, not just another 3% raise, can close that gap in years, not decades. You think about the car, the generator, the amount that still drains into your card every month. None of this will disappear if you accept the offer. A stake doesn't erase the ground beneath your feet. It simply changes why you're standing on it. You type out the acceptance letter late at night, reread it twice, and send it off before you can convince yourself to be safe again. Not because you're confident, but because you finally understand. There was no confidence there, even at your previous job. Artyom's ceiling was never guaranteed 10 years in advance. It just seemed like there was, until no one tested it. The stake lasts 4 years. Nothing will happen tomorrow. Nothing next month either. What you've actually built with this decision is smaller and stranger than the payout. It's access to an outcome that doesn't yet exist, in exchange for a name tied to something that might happen, and that's meaningless if the version of you that made the decision isn't standing by the time it pays off. Build a fortress. 5 months later at Claimstock, you're sitting in the passenger seat of Regina's car, returning from a client meeting, when her phone lights up on the dashboard. It's her father. She hangs up, then lets out a breath that says more than the conversation itself could. "He's almost 70, she says, more to herself. "And I still haven't asked where the will is." At first, you're silent, thinking about your own father who still works, changes his own oil, and refuses to talk about money with anyone. You realize, somewhere on the highway, looking at the passing fields, that you don't know where his will is either. You don't know if it even exists. In the evening, you open your laptop and instead of a freelance marketplace or an automatic payment screen, you're looking at term life insurance offers. Not because something has happened, but because for the first time, something depends on your existence. Your mother, who's still a few years away from retirement, secretly hopes you won't need her help and maybe one day you'll be able to help her yourself. Your combined income between your main job and any leftovers from your part-time job is a fixed amount. Standard advice is coverage equal to 10 to 12 times your annual income. A 20-year policy for a non-smoker in good health costs very little per month, less than a computer monitor once cost. You ponder this for a second. A small monthly sum is the price you pay to prevent a bad day from turning into a second tragedy for someone you love. You think about her father and the unasked question about the will and open a new tab. A basic will, made through one of the online services, is inexpensive. One evening of answering questions. Who gets what? Who to trust with decisions if you can't make them yourself? You don't have much yet, no house, no villa by the lake. But you do have a pension plan, a growing investment account, a stake in a company slowly growing in the background, and a car that thankfully finally runs smoothly. Someone needs to know what to do with all this. A more difficult conversation is the one Regina almost had on the highway. You call your father on Sunday. Not exactly about money, but more about the topic. That's how these conversations usually start. He dodges the question twice. The third time, you simply ask, "Where are the documents? Is there a will? Who should I contact if something happens?" He's silent for a second, then says, "In a fireproof safe in the garage." And there's a hint of relief in his voice that you had to ask, rather than him initiating the conversation. You hang up and sit at the kitchen table, the monitor dimming next to you, the city outside the window going about its Sunday business. This conversation didn't feel like a victory. It felt like maintenance. Unglamorous, the kind of thing no one puts in stories. But it's maintenance that holds up a fortress once it's built. And somewhere between the generator, the company stake, and the fireproof safe in your dad's garage, you stopped being that person in the supermarket aisle, anxiously scrolling through your bank app. Not because the numbers have become easy, but because you finally know which ones are worth carrying. You still check your account almost every morning, but you no longer cringe before the app loads. The anxiety used to set in before the screen itself. Now it's just a habit, like checking the weather before a trip. Today, the conversation about the safe in the garage pops into your head while you're simply cooking dinner. You notice it the way you notice a familiar face of a stranger, not urgently, just there, waiting for you to understand it a little deeper. The car still rumbles slightly on cold mornings. The share hasn't arrived yet. Tuesday will still demand what Monday didn't manage to cover. But you're no longer counting numbers to survive. You're counting them because you finally know what you're protecting. And sometimes, walking past the kitchen table with your laptop closed, you catch yourself wondering, what did your father never ask himself?